And now it appears the U.S., including the Trump administration and what some would call the more hawkish elements, is once again relying on intimidation, pressuring populations and leaderships into accepting future terms on Washington's conditions. Historically, sanctions have played a similar role, just through economic rather than military pressure. But this time, they seem increasingly strained. How effective is it really to sanction something like a Persian Gulf Strait authority that is essentially tied to Iran's own system? And what does it say about the limits of this strategy if even these tools are being pushed to their edge?
Isn't the sanctioning of Iran, it's the secondary sanctions that follow. For instance, any country or ship or whatever that goes through and pays the toll will be subject to secondary sanctions. So that's the goal, is to get people to say no. Except, gosh, Scott, you haven't really thought this one out, have you? Because if they say no, then the oil doesn't flow, and then they die.
Then they stay in the Strait of Hormuz.
Or be sanctioned by America. I think they're going to choose sanctions, Mr. Besant, because your sanctions suck. First of all, my understanding is that they're no longer paying in dollars, and the dollars are no longer going to the banks in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. That's the way Iran used to work until the United States went in and seized those assets, about $12 billion worth. Congratulations, America. You got $12 billion of stolen money that you're going to have to return eventually. It always works out that way. So now you're paying in yuan, Chinese currency, going into banks the United States doesn't control. Or I think that one of the things I've heard is cryptocurrency, that they're collecting tolls in cryptocurrency. Again, the U.S. has zero control over that. And so we can't stop Oman and Iran from doing this. And we can't stop the countries from paying it because they have to pay it to survive. You know, we can threaten secondary sanctions, but all that does is make people pull further away from the American orbit. I mean, Marco Rubio, who I despise openly, once said the few honest things he said when he was talking about Brazil. And Brazil was talking about de-dollarization and working with BRICS to come up with alternative means. And he said, we can't allow this to happen. If Brazil no longer pays in the dollar, we can no longer sanction them. And if we can't sanction them, we can't control them. And that changes the most honest thing anybody's ever said. Because the whole concept of the dollar and everything isn't about, the smooth economic flow. It's about American control, American ability to squeeze, your throat through sanctions. The world is waking up to the fact that there is a limit to American economic power. Russia proved it. China's proved it. Look, the Chinese were threatening. You can't buy. Scott Bessent again. He should learn to shut up. China, your private oil refineries, no Russian oil is allowed to go in there. If they go in there, we're going to sanction you. The Chinese government went, disregard to the Russian oil. If you sanction us, we'll crush you. And Trump already knows. Last time he tried to over-sanction China, China crushed him, squeezed him to death, made him surrender. This is the reality of it. This is a humiliating moment for the United States because one of the greatest economic weapons that we've had, which we've abused over the course of several decades, is now being exposed as literally an empty threat. Scott Bessent isn't going to sanction anybody. You think Iran is afraid of sanctions? Not at all. They've survived under stringent sanctions. And Iran owns us right now because I can guarantee you, if given the choice of being hit with secondary American sanctions or paying the tariff, people are paying the tariff because they need that oil more than they need the blessing of Scott Bessent.
Scott, I want to shift to the Ukraine front. In the last week, Russia has carried out strikes in response to what it described as a major attack in Lugansk that killed civilians, including students and university staff. Now we're seeing contradictory signals, warnings for foreign embassy personnel to leave Kiev, reports of partial diplomatic withdrawals, and at the same time claims from Europe that it is standing firm, while the U.S. position remains less clear. Meanwhile, there are indications that Ukraine and its backers may be escalating pressure further, even at the risk of civilian harm. So how do you assess what is happening on this front right now, and how might it connect to the broader strain the United States is facing in projecting power simultaneously in Ukraine and in the Iran context?
The reality is the United States we can't fight a sustained fight against Iran, which means we can't fight a sustained fight against China, and we can't fight a sustained fight against Russia. And we're not in a position to support others because we're out of ammunition. We're literally out of ammunition. We got nothing left. So we've taken America off the board in terms of relevance. We can't even threaten anything. We can't even get our act together on troops in Poland. 4,200 aren't rotating in, but 5,000 are going in, but Congress hasn't approved, so 5,000 aren't. We don't have anything. We're literally a bunch of hot air coming out of the mouths of the most irrelevant people in the planet. Unfortunately, there are some relevant people that are doing relevant things. The British are very relevant. The British have been running a very successful campaign, which sought to divert the focus of effort away from the battlefield reality where, contrary to popular belief in the West, Russia is dominating across the battlefield. Things are not going well for the Ukrainians and haven't been for some time now. But the British have been playing a different game, a mental warfare game, designed to collapse Russia from within. Anybody who thinks that that's not possible, take a look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. You'll understand how mental warfare played a role in getting Russians to stop believing in themselves, Russians to start looking to the West as a dominant society, to lose faith in your leadership, to lose faith in everything, to abandon what you're supposed to be, who you are. That's what happened in the decade of 1990s. Vladimir Putin did a reversal and built Russia up to where it is today, where they're proud of themselves with just reason, and all this stuff. We're trying to break that down again. That's what mental war is. And one of the things we're doing is exploiting the fact that Vladimir Putin doesn't want to escalate, that Vladimir Putin wants to keep this war confined to Ukraine and deal with the limited objectives of making sure Ukraine doesn't join NATO and doesn't retain Banderist Nazi ideologies, things of that nature, doesn't pose a threat to Russia. So the West has been testing him all along. Every time a red line is drawn, F-16s, red line, Third World War, F-16s coming, Russia just responds by killing the F-16s. HIMARS, attack them, shooting them down, nullify them. How many times? When's the last time you heard about ATACMS doing anything worthwhile in Ukraine? You don't. It's the same thing. Every escalation is managed by Russia. Operation Spiderweb, drones coming in hitting bombers. That should have triggered a massive response. Russia just blew it off because they said it doesn't change the fundamental direction we're heading. We're doing okay. But the British have been focusing on asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare, using drones. Everybody talking about Ukrainian drone operations. At the tactical level, the Ukrainians, I think a lot of the innovation is theirs. But when you get up to the strategic level, this is 100% a British-driven operation assisted by the CIA and in Germany. Firepoint, a Ukrainian drone production company, is look at the CEO. She's some girl with no education who's just a bimbo who was given the job to serve as a way to steal money to enrich Zelensky. But the British took it over and made it something real. The FP5 Flamingo is a British-made weapon. A British-made weapon. It's fired against the Russian strategic depth, claiming to be Ukrainian. Before this war started, the Russians made a point to Joe Biden. We will not tolerate NATO missiles based in Ukraine that can hit Russia's strategic depth. Now you have NATO missiles based in Ukraine that hit Russia's strategic depth, a red line that was crossed. But the Russians went, we can ride this thing out. We can do this. The same thing with the FP1s, this wooden, drone that flies in and hits oil rigs and all that. The Russians are blowing it off, saying it's not a big deal. But there's a continuing echo chamber going out there shouting out about how weak Putin is, how, impotent Russia is, how this, that, and the other thing. And it's starting to resonate within certain segments of Russian society. And you start to get defeatism. You got people start doubting Vladimir Putin. Now, it hasn't reached critical mass. It's a long way from doing that. But it's there. This latest attack against Starobelsk Teachers College is the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't know if Ukraine and Great Britain intended it to be this way. I don't even know if they hit us, if they knew up front they were hitting a teacher's college. I actually think that AI assisted in the designation of the target, just like we did with Manab, clearly a school for children, but we bombed it thinking it was the headquarters of a missile brigade. Here they thought, because they saw photographs of students from another college, not this one, wearing military uniform, that this was a military facility. It's not. Those students were students who were participating in a game. They're non-combatants, not affiliated with the military, everything. That's the reality of it. But the AI doesn't see that because AI is not intelligent. AI just does what the people programmed to do. They saw a photograph and said, this school is a military target. And then the attack was sent in. FP1 drones, 4 of them, each one outfitted with air-to-ground rockets. That's the new variation, which means that somebody has to see it because you don't fire air-to-ground rockets in the blind. This isn't a situation where you program in a GPS coordinate and the FP1 flies out there and flies in and dives in where, it tells the dove. There's another drone above this. There's Starlink connectivity, we know, because they got the antennas, and it's being broadcast back to a command center. And that command center is seeing the target. So these drones come in and they cycle off their air-to-ground rockets. The eyewitnesses on the ground say, we heard rocket fire. We could see the rockets come in. We could hear the rockets come in. FP1 is a propeller-driven thing. It's not a rocket. So rockets being fired. Cycle back, fire again. Cycle back, fire again. 4 times. Then they dive in at the end because they carry 200-kilogram bombs. Dive in, boom, 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 collapse the building, kill 21 students. This resonated in Russia unlike anything. I mean, even in Kursk, when in August of 2024, when the British and American-led Nazis, literal Nazis, I mean, when I say Nazi, I mean swastika-wearing Nazis, went into Kursk, and the Russians couldn't evacuate the elderly from the border villages quick enough. And so hundreds of them, 600 or so, were captured. They were all murdered, butchered, raped. These Nazis were raping 80-year-old women, filming it. And then they go off and they get killed, and the Russians get the bodies, they get the cameras, and they have it. This is not speculation. This is statements of fact, and that didn't trigger this Russian reaction. The Russians still went, we'll just kill them, kill 60 to 80,000 of them, recapture the territory, and keep moving. We're not going to escalate. This attack is different. It hit Russia at the wrong time, and it basically has created an outrage that cannot be ignored by the Russian government. So what the Russian government did, first of all, is respond with a massive strike designed to take out the units responsible. Remember when I said that Starlink was involved? The problem with Starlink involved is that that signal that's going back to have some guy watch this gets intercepted. And the Russians knew where it was. It was probably being run out of, there's a facility south of Kiev where the Oreshenik hit, White Church, it was called, Bely Sirkov. Hit these above ground garages, but we know that those were aircraft maintenance disguised in compartment built during Soviet times, expanded by the Ukrainians, where the FP1 drone unit was that was directing this fight. The Oreshenik took it off the map. It's gone, finished. They struck other facilities in and around Kiev. It's funny how people are like, they struck a museum. They struck a museum. They struck a shopping center. They struck civilian targets, except, gosh, it's the Ukrainians that sit there and make the videos that say, the FP1 drone, a great weapon. We're hitting the Russian oil thing, but we don't produce it in a factory, because if we produce it in a factory, the Russians would hit the factory and destroy it. So today we're in a school gymnasium. Today we're in the basement of a museum. Today they sort of openly admit it. Every place the Russian hit were FP1 drone production facilities related to the attack on this school, command and control facilities, etc. That's what that attack was. That's all it was. Everybody thought that was going to be the big attack that does it. No. Then the Russians came out and said, because, again, Putin doesn't do anything in, knee-jerk. Standard response, and then he sits there and he waits, he deliberates, and they come out and they say, that's it, we're done. No more negotiations. Negotiations are finished. So anybody call us and everybody else in Europe going, well, we're going to try and figure out who's going to represent us in the negotiations with the Russians. There is no more negotiations. This will be unconditional surrender. That's it. Ukraine will accept Russia's terms as dictated by Russia without modifications, or Ukraine will die. That's where we're at. Now, they sent out, in accordance with international law, they have to give adequate warning of any attack that may, cause casualties among the civilian population. And so that's what Russia did. They did it in writing. They've done it with phone calls. And everybody's sitting there going, well, why didn't they have attacked yet? Well, because the Russians are smarter than you and me. I myself said I thought that Kiev would be erased. They're not going to erase Kiev. Why? Because the Russians are smarter than you and me. A member of the State Duma, part of the Defense Committee, gave an interesting interview yesterday where he said, because I'm like, take out the Rada, take out the parliament, make it a visually pleasing thing. He said, the parliament's empty. and you want me to put an Oreshnik on the parliament. An Oreshnik costs $50 million. You want to put a $50 million weapon on an empty building that doesn't accomplish anything. No, when you use the Oreshnik, people have to die. Important people have to die. You have to collapse structures that are underground. That's what the Oreshnik does. So when they fire the Oreshnik, it's at a target that is designed to be collapsed and kill the people inside. That means you have to collect the intelligence where that target is. So they're not going to strike until they get the intelligence. The other thing they said is that this is going to take place over time. So it doesn't have to happen all at once. Fact is, if you go back in the intelligence business, sort of what I used to do in the when I was a weapons inspector, you call it shake the tree. But basically, you go in, you do something to provoke, and then in this case, I move in on a Special Republican Guard facility adjacent to a presidential palace because I believe the Special Republican Guard is hiding weapons of mass destruction documents. I can't prove it though, so I go in there and I jolt them. Then I see what happens. Do cars go out the back? Where do the cars go? This worked like a champ. One place we hit, and sure enough, the cars went out. We tracked it to a place downtown Baghdad, had the U2 image take a picture of it. I went there, and it was an evacuation point for documents related to the work that the Iraqis didn't want us to know about. Shake the tree, make them act, go, and you pounce on them. But in this case, it's not going to be inspections that pounce. It's going to be Oreshnik. It's going to be, Iskander. It's going to be precision munitions. They're going to hit the important things, decision-making centers, and, command and control and defense industry production, because the Ukrainians are not going to put it all in the factory. The factories are going to disappear. They're going to break it up and hide it around the country as they are wont to do. And Russians will detect it and kill it. This is a long-term strategy of absolutely degrading Ukraine's ability to stay in this fight. And that's what we're going to see going forward. I don't think we're going to see the massive strike that everybody's expecting. I was expecting it, but I don't think we're going to see that because I've been listening. That's the sign of a good analyst, by the way. You shut up sometimes. We're on a talk show, so I'm talking. But when we're done, I shut up and I listen. I listen to what the Russians say. I read what the Russians write, and I absorb it. And in absorbing what the Russians have been saying, I don't think there's going to be a massive decapitation strike. I think there's going to be a program of precision strikes over time that destroy Ukraine's ability to continue this fight. And there's nothing the West can do about it. The other thing is the Russians are prepared to strike Europe, and the decision has already been made. Latvia is on notice. If they allow, next week, there's the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And that's where I'm headed to speak. But the day after I speak, Vladimir Putin speaks. The Ukrainians want to put drones into St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. They're not going to. If they fly through the Baltic corridor, then the Baltic nations will be destroyed, eliminated. That's just a statement of fact. And if Europe wants to do anything about it, then Russia will hit them as well. This is where Russia's at right now. They're just tired of playing games. They're tired of, dealing with stupid people. And they're just at the point right now where if you continue to attack Russia in a way that threatens it existentially, Russia will respond accordingly. Ukraine, unfortunately, is going to find out this lesson. It's the end of Ukraine. Ukraine will cease to exist in the state that it is. There will be unconditional surrender. Russia will control the government. The United States no longer has a vote. You remember how Donald Trump was talking about how we're going to have, security guarantees. We're going to have, we're going to control this and that and the other thing. The U.S. doesn't have a vote. We're done. We actually backed out. We're finished. And they will never be invited back in. That's the reality. Europe's never been invited in, although they think they want to be invited in. Nobody will be invited in. This is between Russia and Ukraine.
Scott, I see a parallel here with what we've been hearing from the Trump administration, especially since the early phase of the Iran strikes, where officials repeatedly claimed that Iran's military capabilities had been essentially destroyed. At the same time, we're seeing a similar narrative around Russia, portraying it as being on the back foot, even as the reality on the ground appears far more complex and unresolved. Yet despite these claims of weakness on the other side, neither conflict seems to be producing a clear or decisive outcome for the U.S. or its allies. So how do you interpret this gap between the political messaging and the actual strategic results we're seeing in both cases?
Well, let's look at a statement of fact. Remember that, you don't have to put that chart up, but the chart that you had there before, and they talked about a framework agreement. That's a framework agreement between the Trump administration and American defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others, that they're going to ramp up production. There's no money been attached to that, so therefore it's purely theoretical. Nothing's happening. That's the state of U.S. defense industry, totally incapable of meeting the demands of modern war. As we saw, a 37-day campaign against Iran has literally drained the arsenal of the West. An ongoing conflict with Ukraine has done the same with Europe and what's ever left of the United States arsenal. Zero. Russia, on the other hand, has been building up its defense industry. It's just chugging along like you wouldn't believe. And Russia's not just building things and using things. That's how we operate in the West, by the way. That's one of the reasons why we don't have massive stockpiles, because you can't convince Congress of the need to overproduce and have 5,000 weapons sitting in a warehouse that may never get used. And if they never get used, then they get outdated. And that means we just spend a lot of money on weapons because our weapons are very expensive. So we can't overproduce them. We have to produce just the number we need to meet certain benchmarks of training and operational storage. But our operations are always based on short wars because we're going to intimidate the enemy into surrendering. We don't have any plan for long wars because we can't produce enough weapons to support a long war. Look at this 37-day war. We couldn't do it. Russia, on the other hand, operates only on the concept of long wars. So their defense industry is not just producing weapons for this war, but remember, their military went from 900,000, then was expanded to 1.2 million, and now is currently expanded, I think, to over 2 million. That's a lot of people. Where are they getting their weapons? From Russian defense industry. And it's not just guns and uniforms and ammunition. It's the weapons of war, tanks. I love when I hear stupid people like Jeff Fisher, some retired colonel idiot, who's like, the Russians don't have anything. The Russians have everything, Jeff. Everything you don't have, everything the West doesn't have. They've been producing tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery pieces on a regular basis, and they don't go to the front lines exclusively. They go out to equip the new units that have been created, like the 70,000 strong new Army Corps in the St. Petersburg military district that has armor, artillery, everything. And you don't just build armor, artillery, you have the ammunition that they need to fight a sustained war. So they build up the ammunition stocks as well. This is what Russia is doing. Russia will never run out of ammunition. Look at Oreshnik. Russia's fired 3 of them. The first 2 were experimental models. I don't know what this one was, probably a serial production one. They went into serial production in August. Let's just call August a wash, meaning we plan on going to serial production, but we haven't quite produced it yet. So September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. 9 months. Minimum production, 5 Oreshniks. 9 times 5, 45. 45 minus 1, 44. They have 44 Oreshniks. But that's minimum production. Maximum production, based upon what I experienced when I worked at Vodkinsk, they could probably produce, they were running out the, annual production for the SS-20s, 80 a year or so. But let's just call it, let's break it down. Let's call it half that. The bottom line is that there's 60 or so. The Russians probably have somewhere, around, 50, 60, 70 Oreshniks. That's a lot. They're not all going to be used against Ukraine. There's Oreshniks that are set aside for, first of all, Belarus, which has its own regiment, 9 launchers. Each launcher probably a complement of 2. That's 18 missiles that can be armed and fired against Europe. There's other regiments out there. Germany's got its own Oreshniks attached to it. England does, France. The Oreshnik covers a whole bunch of stuff. They have long-range, Iskanders, thanks to the fact that we got out of the INF treaty. The Iskander K now probably operates in a range of over 2,000 kilometers. That can hit Europe as well, also hit Ukraine. But they've been producing these. They've been producing some prodigious number. When the war first started, the Russians, the Iskander was a Army-level battlefield support weapon. So in order to fire an Iskander, it had to go up the chain, and an Army-level commander had to say, we're going to hit that target. You understand that that is not a responsive targeting. That is a strategic targeting, command and control, command posts, airfields, in support of a larger operation. Today, Iskanders, on a daily basis, are literally on launch ready mode with a forward observer with a drone. And he can sit out there, boom, and he gets a target that is deemed worth hitting, troops training something. He can direct the Iskander to be fired instantly, and it will hit the target. Why can they do that? Because they've produced so many Iskanders, they can now bring it down to be literally a battlefield support weapon. The Russians have nothing but ammunition. And they're, the British just, 500,000 Russian dead. No, probably 300,000. That's probably an accurate number. But the British can't tell the truth because they're involved in this psychological operation. Now, 300,000 is a lot. That sort of matches the numbers that we lost the United States in both theaters of World War II. So anybody pretending this isn't a bloody war is wrong. But the Ukrainian numbers are about 2.2 million right now, dead. When you add wounded, over 5 million. And the data seems to support this. Even Scott Blaber, Pete Blaber, former Delta Force guy in the know, has come out and talked about millions of Ukrainian dead. Because that's the truth. We can try to disguise it any way we want to. The Russians aren't losing 30,000 men a month. It's not even close to that. The Ukrainians are losing 1, 2, 3, 4,000 guys a day. And they can't recruit enough. There's a deficit there. This is the reality. The Russians are doing everything right. They're not doing it the way some in the West would like it to. There's a lot of people say, we want it to end, want it to do this, want it to do that. Russians are doing it their way. Frank Sinatra literally sang a song about them. They've done it their way. This is the reality. The Russians are winning this war. And now the Russians are going to win the mental war aspect too, because they're going to flip the script on the British, and it's going to be the collapse. When the Russians begin this campaign of taking down Ukrainian decision-making centers, they're going to make it lethal to be somebody working with the Ukrainians. Right now, underground, there's a whole bunch of NATO guys, a whole bunch of American guys in there working with the Ukrainians. It's going to become lethal to do this. They're not going to hit the embassy and kill American diplomats. But if Americans have any of their technicians underground in a center, they're going to die. And when that happens, the rats will leave the sinking ship, and the Ukrainians will be on their own, and it'll eventually lead to the total collapse of Ukraine, which could happen as soon as this summer. June is going to be a critical month. That's why I'm excited. I didn't know about this when I decided I'm going to Russia in June, but I'm going to be in Russia in one of the most important months of this this is the month of decision. I think the outcome's obvious, but still, it's going to be contested. Zelensky has announced that June's the month where he's going to launch the long-awaited drone offensive that was supposed to break the will of the Russian people. 16 to 20,000 drones are being provided by the British. Zelensky's talking about launching up to 6,000 drones a day against Russian targets. The Russians will counter. It's going to get ugly fast. It's all going to happen in June. I don't know if, they say St. Petersburg at night, you're supposed to go out at night. They raise the bridges. You look at the ships go through the stars. It's beautiful. I think we might get a different light show altogether, because this is the reality of war. But it's going to be a major month. And I think it's going to be the month that Ukraine stops functioning as a modern nation state and starts functioning as a nation in absolute collapse, absolute decline.